By trade, I make other people honest with numbers. I am Barbara Roberts, CPA and financial auditor, the neighbor who notices when the HOA treasurer's receipts don't add up, and the person my clients call when they suspect someone has been cooking the books. My life is spreadsheets, late-night coffees, and the noise-absorbing rituals of someone who spends her days asking the polite, relentless question, "Show me the receipt." At home, I'm the planner, the detail person. I've been booked solid this month because my parents, Martha and George, are about to hit 40 years of marriage, and I promised them a celebration that looks like they deserve. A small, honest party, sun in the backyard, my mother's old playlist, my father trying to bribe the bartender with dad jokes. What's at stake is not just a cake and a playlist. It's the one weekend my parents get to feel adored without drama. It's the reputational tidy-up after a year of small family fires. My father's knees, my mother's cataract surgery, my job juggling client audits with PTA carpool. I have an in-law suite, a tidy, separate space with a pull-out couch, a mini fridge, and a lockable cupboard where we keep extra linens and my mother's heirloom recipe boxes. I kept it empty for the anniversary weekend because I know boundaries. The siren call of convenience has a way of turning anniversaries into circuses. Then my brother Caleb called. Caleb is 12 minutes younger than me and 3 decades worse at reading people. He's the kind of man who will give you the shirt off his back until you've taken the shirt, the shoes, and a mortgage payment. And he still says, "No worries, sis." He loves hard, blindly, and he adores his fiancée, Melissa Navarro, with the same blind worship. Melissa's the kind of person who can smile like a hurricane and walk into a room like she owns the central air. She has a laugh that fills spaces, often other people's spaces. "Barbara," Caleb said, "Melissa's cousin and his family need a place to stay. They're 5 people. Melissa says they're going through a rough patch. Can they crash at the in-law suite? It'll only be for the weekend. It'll be fine." That "it'll be fine" is both a promise and a small nuclear weapon in our family. I paused, like a person flipping through the receipts of a suspiciously generous benefactor. How many rooms do they need? The in-law is 1 suite. Just room enough for 2 extra kids on the couch. Melissa said she'd handle the linens. Her dad's offering to help with transportation. Softening language. Calibers of pressure. I said, "They can't. I promised Mom and Dad the space. We can find them a motel." Caleb's voice lost its warmth. "Barbara, come on. Melissa said they're struggling. You know, job stuff. Melissa's father, Frank, will be coming too. He's a good man. It's just for a couple nights." When someone says it's just in my world, a bell rings. "Show me the receipt," I wanted to say aloud. Instead, I said, "I'll need names and dates and a proper plan for sleeping arrangements. Also, if they're truly struggling, I'll happily help coordinate actual assistance. Food boxes, job leads, but the in-law suite is not a drop-in Airbnb." Caleb sighed. "You're being dramatic." That should have ended it, but drama doesn't clock out when accountants go home. It migrates. 2 hours later, Melissa called. She did the thing people who grow up practicing persuasion do. The voice flattened, the words primed with urgency. "Barbara, hi. So grateful you picked up. Look, my cousin, Marcos, and his wife have had a nightmare month. They lost a contract. Their car is in the shop. Their kids need a place to sleep. We'd only be there Friday to Sunday. It would mean so much." I could hear Mr. Navarro, Melissa's father, in the background, a low, firm voice saying something like, "This is family." I said what I'd already said. I was sorry. I'd promised the suite for the anniversary, and I could help find a cheap motel or call family services. Her tone tilted. "Barbara, you don't understand. We really need this. Melissa is asking as a favor. Her father is coming all the way from out of state. Caleb is worried. It would be humiliating if I made them sleep in a motel. They have little kids." "No," I said. The word felt small and weighty at the same time. "I promised my parents privacy for their anniversary. If you want to bring up specific financials, I can look into whether other arrangements make sense, but the suite is not available." "You're being selfish." There it was, blunt and practiced. Accusation is a compact weapon. You always say the same thing. I laughed in that steady baritone way auditors have when someone suggests the obvious answer is moral or immoral rather than practical. "I'm being responsible," I said. "I'm protecting my parents' weekend." She snapped. You're protecting your precious image. It's typical. I could feel my throat tighten, not with anger, but with the slow, efficient buildup of someone cataloging evidence in real time. Melissa, this is not about image. This is about boundaries. If you want to argue at family gatherings, we can do that in person. Don't gaslight me over the phone. She raised her voice and, in the same breath, summoned her father onto the line. I don't know if Melissa told Frank the conversation was turning until he answered, and an older, softer, dangerous tone filled the call. Barbara, I don't like people being difficult about family, he said. Isn't this what families do? Open arms. I told him calmly what I had told his daughter. The suite was for my parents' anniversary. We'd arranged catering and seating based on the numbers I'd given. My mother had specific medical needs to manage while hosting. And no, I would not uproot a plan that was about celebrating a marriage that lasted 4 decades for something that could be solved other ways. Frank didn't like no. He didn't like being told a grown woman was setting limits on his daughter's requests. He called me cold and inflexible. Caleb, who loves to keep the peace, tried to mediate in apologetic, walking on eggshells sentences. Babs, can we just compromise? Maybe they come for part of Saturday? Or stay in the spare room for one night? You'll be sleeping on couches that were not paid for with someone else's quiet, I said. No. The conversation slid into that low, slow orbit where every sentence is evidence and every sigh a deposition. Melissa invoked hardship. Frank invoked family, and then an old trick, the moral ledger. We helped you when you moved in with the kids, he said. We looked after them that time. Aren't you grateful? I didn't contest the favors. I kept to facts. I appreciate help. That was 2 years ago. This weekend is my parents'. I did not ask for it to be complicated. Things escalated. Melissa's voice got sharper, spears of sarcasm now punctuating her sentences. Caleb sounded troubled in the way people sound when they are torn between 2 loyalties. Frank, who'd always seemed like an anchor in the few family moments I'd had with him, began naming obligations. We can't keep building walls, Barbara. The problem with walls is that some people mistake them for eviction notices. I told them I would not be moving my parents' celebration or forcing my mother to share a room with strangers. I said we could find alternative lodging for Melissa's cousin's family or help with resources, but the suite would remain my parents' sanctuary. Then Melissa said something I didn't expect. If you won't help us, you won't be invited. Silence. And then the tiny, blazing clarity that I had built more in my head than could fit in my phone line. She hung up. Caleb's line went dead after 3 more frantic rings. Frank left a voicemail, terse and disappointed. So that was the first act. A collision at the planning table, an attempt to turn charity into turf, and the collision of 2 kinds of loyalty, one to blood, one to promises made intentionally. I sat at my kitchen island, phone in hand, hearing the sounds of my own house. The dishwasher hum, the distant cartwheel of a neighbor's dog, the soft, steady breathing of a life arranged to accommodate truth and boundaries. I looked at the calendar where I'd penciled in the anniversary, and as an auditor, the little lights in my brain blinked like status codes. Red for risk, amber for escalation, green for something salvageable if handled right. This weekend was supposed to be small, safe, and tender. In a family, small and safe is often the hardest thing to protect. I set the phone down and began compiling a list. Not of receipts this time, but of options. Little did I know the next call would pull back a curtain I hadn't expected to find, and that this ordinary, stubborn no would become the hinge on which a much larger truth would swing. I set my laptop on the kitchen counter like a prosecutor laying out exhibits. The house had gone quiet after the first round of phone calls. My parents busy upstairs, Caleb in an awkward, small-sounding silence, and the dog pacing like it knew something electric had happened. I could feel the familiar click of my mind arranging facts into a map. Receipts, timestamps, social posts, words people said when they thought no one was listening. Auditing is, at its heart, pattern recognition applied to human mess. It rewards curiosity and punishes sloppy explanations. I was curious. Melissa's request had not landed as a single plea. It arrived shaped by a history. Over the last 3 years, she had woven herself into our family as both benefactor and beneficiary, The relative who showed up with casseroles, the one who borrowed money and paid it back in vague installments, the one who knew exactly which heartstrings to pluck. That pattern had a cost. My father, George, is an open-hearted man with a soft spot for rescuing people. He once told me, "We've had people help us. It's only right to pay it forward." That is a beautiful credo, until somebody opens the door and walks through to take everything. My red flag wasn't a feeling. It was a $20,000 wire transfer 2 years ago with the memo line, "Merchant investment, Melissa's idea." My father had never been entrepreneurial. He's a retired machinist who still calls me to ask how to fill out certain forms, but he's trusting. He believed Melissa's pitch, an online boutique that would sell ethically sourced home goods. She showed him mock-ups, a website prototype, a glossy business plan PDF that smelled faintly of someone who'd practiced optimism as a sales pitch. He transferred the money. The business failed on paper 3 months later, and Melissa's promises became a series of increasingly intimate explanations. Bad vendor, a stolen prototype, a payment processor that vanished. My father slept poorly for weeks after that. He hadn't wanted to make a fuss. He said to me quietly, "She seemed so sincere." Show me the receipts, I thought, the way I always do. What followed was low-velocity excavation. Bank statements, email chains, text threads where timelines blurred. The more I followed, the less failed business. Looked like failure, and the more it looked like a funnel. Transfers to accounts in Melissa's name, partial reimbursements to third parties that didn't exist, and most damning, evidence of lifestyle that didn't align with struggling. My auditor brain translated life into a ledger, and the ledger whispered inconsistencies. I set up a conference call. It was surgical. Caleb, Melissa, Frank, my parents on speaker, and me. I told them I would take 5 minutes to explain what I'd found, and then we'd talk options. Not accusations sent into the void, but discrete findings with supporting evidence. Call it petty, call it thorough, but I was tired of watching kindness be treated like an ATM. I labeled them audit points because I can't help myself. They were short, sharp, and defensible. Audit point 1, source of funds. Dad, remember the $20,000 you sent? Date, reference, account numbers. I pulled a clean copy of the transfer and the bank memo. That transfer went to an account that's primarily used by Melissa. There is a trail of small transfers back to vendors that, when cross-referenced with the business's supposed vendor list, don't match. That's a red flag for diverted funds. There was a small intake of breath from Frank. Caleb began to say something and stopped. Audit point 2, lifestyle mismatch. I looked at public posts associated with Melissa and separately with Marcos's family. The ones Melissa says are in dire financial straits. Marcos and his wife posted a week-long family vacation to Orlando 3 months ago, with photos at theme parks, hotel check-ins, and a video with a clearly branded resort band around their wrist. The photos are geotagged. There are restaurant bills in the metadata. That's inconsistent with the story of immediate financial ruin. Melissa's voice turned from defiant to brittle. That was a one-off they saved for, she said. Sometimes you splurge to keep the kids' spirits up. Which, sure, people make choices. But a pattern of convenience and selective crisis doesn't add up when you're asking a man whose passport money you just took to housing strangers for free. Audit point 3, the sunk cost. Caleb, I said softly, because he needed the truth without the scalpel. You've sunk love, faith, and effort into this relationship. People call this the sunk cost fallacy. You keep investing because you already invested. It's powerful, it's human, but it's not an accounting principle. Your emotional investments don't amortize financial risk. Caleb's voice broke. I know, he said. I know I messed up. Audit point 4, intent and access. Melissa, in a previous stay, when Marcos's family was here for a visit last year, you had access to the in-law suite. There was an incident where several personal documents and client files went missing from a locked cabinet in that suite. Nobody wanted to make a scandal out of it then. We treated it as a misunderstanding. I didn't. Melissa's defense sharpened into anger. That's a lie. I would never. I held up my hand, not physically, but in the rhythm of the call. Final finding, I said. I installed, legally and on property I own, a security camera in the in-law suite after the $20,000 transfer when my father asked about it, and I wanted to monitor access to certain secure files. I recorded footage of someone, Melissa, entering the suite when she was supposed to be visiting, moving to the lockbox, and attempting to open a safe where we keep personal documents and client contracts. The footage shows the handle jiggling, the attempt to open, and the surrounding timestamps aligning with the period when files were reported missing. There was an audible intake of breath so large it felt like the sound of the house exhaling. Caleb made a sound that was equal parts betrayal and disbelief. My parents were quiet. Then my mother said simply, "Barbara?" "Mom, I didn't want to believe what I saw. I didn't broadcast it. I wanted to be fair. But fairness without truth becomes something else. I have the footage. I have the timestamps. I have a time-coded record of when certain files stopped being where they were meant to be and when Melissa was in proximity to them. That's evidence." Melissa's voice, until now always loud enough to fill a room, dropped to small, sharp syllables. "You can't. You had no right." "You're right," I said. "I had the right to protect my parents' property. I also had the right to know what happened to important documents. What I do with the evidence is governed by property law, privacy law, and moral urgency to protect people who depend on my integrity. I told you what I would do if we couldn't agree. I would present the facts. That's what I'm doing." There was silence so heavy it felt like a physical thing. Frank coughed somewhere in the background, a dry noise. Caleb's breathing sped up. Melissa stammered, then began to talk fast in that way people do when they're trying to fill a vacuum with words. She called names, twisted blame, called me cold, accused me of setting a trap. The old playbook. I named the documents she'd targeted aloud, nothing that would violate client confidentiality on my end, but enough to anchor the moment in specificity. At that, Melissa went quiet. The only sound was the tiny hiss of her inhale, like someone folding in on themselves. Then, without argument, without a final plea, she hung up. Phones drop in storms. Sometimes people don't pick them up again. This was not a phone left to ring. It was a person who had been shown that their performance of helplessness no longer matched the ledger on the table. She cut the line because the line had become incontrovertible. After the call, the house felt different, heavier, but cleaner. My father, who had been silent, said, "I'm proud you looked into it. I didn't want to know, but I'm glad you did." My mother clutched my hand like it was a life raft. Caleb apologized until his words ran thin. He asked me what to do. I told him a few boring, hard things. Return the money if it could be, formally ask for an accounting, seek legal advice if necessary, and most importantly, calibrate love with evidence. Love without accountability becomes a ledger with missing pages. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about halting a pattern of extraction. And the camera? I know people will judge the ethics, and I live with that. I installed it because someone close to us had asked me to trust them with a pile of money and then asked for more favors without transparency. I chose to collect data instead of rumors. Data is boring until it isn't. By the time I sat back down, my phone had a voicemail from Melissa. 10 seconds of static and then a single tremulous, "Tell him I'm sorry," before hanging up. That was not an admission. It was a fissure. The rest of the family call notes were a tangle of regret and pragmatic next steps. I closed my laptop and let the silence do its work for a minute. The anniversary weekend was no longer about whether strangers could sleep in the in-law suite. It was about whether we would let a family's generosity become a sluice gate for someone else's opportunism. I had the receipts. I had the footage. I had given people the chance to explain. When explanation failed, documentation filled the gap. There was, for the first time in months, a sense of structural calm. Not victory so much as order restored. The problem with being an auditor is that you see things that other people don't want looked at. The benefit is that when you finally put the correct labels on the columns, the books balance. Then you can decide what to keep and what to close. Two mornings later, I woke to silence so complete it felt almost earned. No message threads buzzing, no just checking in texts from Caleb, no new explosions from Melissa's camp, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and sunlight making thin stripes across the tile. That quiet was the first real thing that had happened in weeks. It felt like evidence of something fixed. I poured coffee and looked around the house that had, briefly, become a battleground. The banner boxes for the anniversary still sat by the wall, the good china waiting to be unpacked. But the thought of staging a happy family party here, in the same rooms where those calls had happened, felt dishonest. My parents deserved peace, not performance. When I told them I was canceling the party, my mother blinked in surprise. My father's eyebrows drew together. I explained simply, "This house has seen enough noise. You deserve a celebration that isn't about damage control." Then I showed them the booking confirmation, a quiet beach resort 2 hours away, small cabins facing the dunes, no guest list, no speeches, just sand, good food, and distance. My mother smiled like she'd been holding her breath for months. My father looked at me and said, "You always did know how to fix the books, Barb." We left Friday morning. The air smelled like salt and freedom. My kids tumbled out of the car barefoot before we'd even checked in, racing toward the surf like they'd been practicing for this exact moment. My parents watched them, hand in hand, the way they've always been, two people who somehow built a steady life out of hard work and stubborn decency. That night, we had dinner on the porch. The sea made its constant low accounting of the shore. My father toasted my mother with a glass of cheap wine and said, 40 years of honest mistakes and lucky guesses. She laughed until she cried. I thought about all the chaos that honesty costs and how it's still cheaper than the alternative. Caleb called later. His voice was steadier but thin around the edges. I broke things off, he said. It's messy. She's angry, but I think I see it now. Love isn't proof of integrity, I said. It's just the initial investment. He laughed, small and tired, always with the accountant metaphors. After the call, I walked down to the water. My kids had made a sand fort, messy and overbuilt, the kind you know will wash away by morning. My parents sat under a blanket watching them. The moon laid a bright path across the water, like an exit lane for worry. I stood there and thought about boundaries, how people frame them as walls when they're really scaffolding. They don't keep love out, they keep self-respect standing. And sometimes you need to let certain connections collapse before you can build anything livable again. When we went back to our cabin, my mother kissed my cheek and whispered, "You did the right thing." I didn't need her to say it, but it landed anyway. The next morning, we watched the tide erase every footprint from the night before. The ocean doesn't keep records. I do. But for once, I didn't feel like checking the numbers. I just let the ledger close itself.